So, as Becky said, today's session is really quite broad-ranging. We're talking about different digital tools that you could be using in actually doing the research. So previous sessions have sort of been that how do you establish your personal profile, and the sessions that are going to follow are going to talk about how you get the most impact out of your publications, out of your research using digital means. Everything we're presenting today has to do more about that research process, from how do you build a research team, how do you work with your research team, how do you engage with participants, how do you collect data using digital tools. So it is a bit of a mismatch of different tools, but we're hoping that everyone will walk out of here with a few things that they could use in their project. What I want to talk to you a bit about is tools that you can use to get to know your research team, which to me is really the first stage of doing collaborative work, interdisciplinary work, multidisciplinary work, which, as we know, is becoming increasingly important. But we often don't stop to talk about how do you actually build an interdisciplinary team? How do you actually work with people that you've just met or they're coming from very different fields? So what I'm talking about is, how do team members work together? How do you talk about what the objective of your work is? And how do you talk about the skills and resources that you bring to a team, but equally the skills and resources that you're looking for from team members? And then once you have that team, how are you going to communicate within the team? And that's where Chris is going to pick up, and we've got a few other presenters who will also be talking about that, communicating with team members. But to get started, I'm just going to play you a video from my latest research project. Okay, so that was a digital story created by a woman named Philippa who works with the disability football program in, well, just outside of Leicester. And I know the topic won't be relevant to everyone, but the process in which that story was created, I think, could be useful to a lot of different fields. So essentially what my project was looking at London 2012 Paralympic Games had the motto, inspire a generation. And my research question was, who's been inspired? How have people been inspired? Let's talk about some of the outcomes of that 2012 Paralympics. So I've been working with different groups involved in parasport, mostly young people involved in parasport, to say, how did you get into parasport? Were you inspired by the Paralympics? Was that relevant to you? And then also talking to coaches and managers and that and say, what was your pathway into parasport? We went into different centers and held digital storytelling workshops, which is essentially getting a group 4 to 15 people and saying, giving them a question that was, what is your story about disability sport? And then in that workshop, creating that story you just saw. And then sharing the stories with the others in the workshop. So there are a few stages where they wrote the outline of the story, they shared it with people in the group, they went back, they worked on it. We had a little mini film fest. People asked questions about their story, they went back, revised it, and now we have a collection of stories. They're actually up on a YouTube channel, including a playlist of stories from the Leicester Inclusive Football Program. And that includes stories from 11-year-old football players to Sam and Philippa, to even starting to bring in stories from parents about how they found out about disability sport. Now, the history of digital storytelling as a research tool really dates back to the 1990s in the California Center for Digital Storytelling. Now, technically, there's a lot of things that could be called digital storytelling, including someone's Facebook page. But when I refer to digital storytelling, I'm referring to this tradition from the California Center that really promoted this as a way of doing community-based research and activism and advocacy work. And the idea is that everyone has a story to tell, and we want to help give people the tools to tell their stories. It's been used by community activists, educators, public health practitioners. It's used as part of public history projects, community activism, community mobilization. It's been used in schools with disadvantaged youth. But most generally, the stories created have been the product of the research, sort of the output of the research. And that's very much been the case with the project I've been working on, is sort of we create these stories, and that's my data, that's my findings, that's what I share afterwards. What I've started to think about throughout the project is whether we could start thinking about storytelling as part of the research process. And the reason I'm saying this is because although the stories like Philippa's have been useful in, for example, we've been taking them to people who fund parasport and saying, these are the stories from participants from your program, or people who do sport policy and showing them some of the stories, or educators and showing them the stories to talk to them about including parasport in their schools. The feedback I'm getting from participants is that the most valuable part of it to them was getting to know the people in their own community. So people who were already on their football team, but they didn't really know much about them or why they were there or why they were so passionate about football or any of those things. So it was that workshop that was actually really of value. So I've started exploring how digital storytelling can become part of that getting to know your research community. And, oops, another story here. This is a project that, as you'll see, I was not directly involved in, but I'm one of the characters in the story.
There once were two women who were passionate about interculturalism. There was Wendy Frisbee, a human kinetics professor from UBC, and Paula Carr, an interculturalism specialist from the Renfrew-Collingwood neighborhood. Though Wendy and Paula were quite similar, they didn't know that each other existed. Wendy was in the westernmost part of Vancouver, while Paula was on the easternmost part of Vancouver. Would their paths ever cross? They needed each other, but they just didn't know it. Each of them had something that the other valued. Wendy was an expert in physical health and had ample access to physical resources, but needed more interculturalism and community engagement. Paul, on the other hand, had much experience and knowledge in community engagement, but needed more interculturalism and physical resources. Both wanted their communities to thrive. While going about their separate ways, Paula's niece Andrea, who was also Wendy's grad student, saw that each woman had something that the other needed. But bringing these two women together was a big challenge. One day, Wendy had a brilliant idea. Why not create an interculturalism, health, and physical activity seminar? UBC students can learn more about interculturalism and how it can enhance physical activity and overall health. While researching for a seminar, Wendy discovered that Paula, whom Andrea wanted her to meet, was a key resource. Wendy was finally motivated to contact Paula, and a beautiful friendship developed. They realized they were both passionate about interculturalism, physical activity, and community engagement. It all suddenly clicked. They were destined to meet each other after all. Together, these women brainstormed, and the concept for the Renfrew-Collingwood Intercultural Health and Physical Activity Initiative developed. This was later rebranded as Renfrew-Collingwood Interactive. Because of their willingness to explore something new, Wendy and Paula together bridged the gap between UDC and Renfrew-Collingwood. An intercultural partnership between the two individuals grew into the meeting of two much larger communities.
Okay, so that is a story from a research project at the University of British Columbia, where I did my PhD, that they came a little bit closer to that idea of using digital storytelling as part of the process that I've been exploring. However, it was still done retrospectively. Partway through the project, they realized that they wanted a way of documenting the process that they had undergone, but also a way of communicating to community members, to partners at UBC and partners in Collingwood Renfrew, like what this initiative actually was. So they had people who were involved in the research process create, once again, digital stories, and there's a series of 12, I think. This is the first one that says how this project start. The next one talks about different partners, then one talks about some of the specific initiatives, one gives the students' perspective, others gives community members' perspectives, but it's a very nice collection of stories. And in my mind, far more engaging than some of the sort of interim reports or something that I might write in a project to communicate to project partners where the research is at. So basically, what I've been looking at doing is what they did, but do it throughout the process rather than having to go back and say, what was our process? The next step in this, in my mind, though, is really to bring storytelling even earlier into the project and to start by telling your collaborators, who are you? What's your story? And why are you interested in this project? And what do you want out of it? So the same way that Philippa told that story about how she became involved in disability sport, disability football, looking at, can we as researchers use storytelling as a way of talking to collaborators about our motivations for being part of the project, what skills and resources we bring, and what outcomes we're looking for. And on one hand, I think that's pretty simple, that's pretty basic, but often when we talk about a project's objectives, we talk about what's the impact of that research, what's the outcome of that research. We don't necessarily talk about why I became involved in that project. So I might talk about the importance of parasport or why I think parasport should be in the schools or something like that. But I don't actually talk about, like, what are my career aspirations? What do I need my CV to look like at the end of this project? How did I even find out about this topic? Why do I research parasport in the first place? And sharing that with your partners and your team members, in my mind, actually can lead to a very productive relationship that lets you do a lot more in the research project. And the reason I know this, even though I say I'm still in the early stages of playing around with this as a method, is because I've had such a great relationship with the Leicester Inclusive Football Program. We spent a lot of time getting to know each other during those storytelling workshops. And as a result, there's been a lot of spin-off projects from it. Because I have a sense now of what's going to interest Sam and what's going to interest Philippa. And I know how to point them towards different opportunities, and they do the same for me. But like I said, it's because we took time to get to know each other. And because I am an athlete, I compare this to how sports teams work together. You know, early in the season, you spend a lot of time on drills, but you spend a lot of time just doing drills because it helps you get to know your teammates. It helps you get to function together. Later in the season, you focus on very specific goals. But early in the season, it's just about putting in a lot of time together. And those are the teams that really go the distance. So we've got an activity for you. You're not going to have time to create a full digital story, but we are going to ask you to create a story. If you flip through the booklets, there should be a digital storytelling worksheet. Thanks. Okay, so basically what I'm going to ask you to do is we'll do this in groups of 3 or 4. So by flipping around to join the people right behind you or right in front of you. But you're going to start on your own. And your task is to think about a specific research project that you're either currently involved in, about to undertake, or recently completed. Just make sure you have one project in mind. And you're going to create the story of me and our research. And in that story, you're going to tell people, who are you as a researcher? What's your interest in that research project, or what was your interest in your research project? What are you personally hoping to get out of that project? So in addition to what research outcomes are you looking for, why are you motivated to do that project? What skills will you bring to the team? And equally, what skills or knowledge or resources are you looking for from others? I've got a few sort of prompts that you can use or not use. Some people find them helpful, but one's got sort of the questions, who am I, what's my interest, everything I just talked about. The other is what I call the storyboard, which is essentially, if you think about the story in a series of vignettes, it could be, you could sketch out the different aspects of your story, you could write a few keywords, you could write the text, like the voiceover that was in the Wendy and Paula story, or the text that was in Philippa's story. But basically, do a little cartoon of your story. And then you're going to flip around, and in groups of 3 or 4, you're going to tell your story to the people in your group. And they're also going to ask you questions about your story. So it's a bit of an icebreaker activity, getting to know people, but it's also, in my mind, it's been a very useful tool for some of the teams I've been working with. In terms of, if you want to know how you go about making this sketch into a digital story, the whole idea behind the California Center for Digital Storytelling is use simple tools, use tools that people are already working on, use tools they're comfortable with. So when I'm working with young people, a lot of them are drawing, and we're simply snapping photos and putting them into a slideshow. The Wendy and Paula story was a PowerPoint. The other one was illustrations that were scanned. Philippa, sorry, not Philippa's, but some of the others included video clips, and we used iMovie. But really finding out, are people using their phones? Are they using iMovie? And then going with the technologies they're familiar with and that they're interested in learning more about. So, and I have a lot of resources if anyone wants to follow up with actually creating some digital stories.